great choices always feel inevitable after the fact. And so like in a film, when a sequence is really working, it's because you can't imagine any song but that song, or you can't imagine any cut but that cut. But when you're the one sitting in the editing room and you have every choice, it's like a really, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It is. And I think that's a magical, it's cool to hear that story. I think that's the addicting part of the process to me, is that time in post, and you're trying to figure out like what gives this film power, because maybe it's different than the thing that I set out thinking. You know what I mean? Like we've been wrestling with this latest cut, and it's the same thing. It's like, what is the thing at the heart of this thing that's making it go? Like what is it? And how do we find that and focus on that and cut away all the stuff that's just not? Because I do that a lot, where the thing that I thought coming in was going to be the big thing, people are like, we can lose that thing.
Yeah, you're like sitting back there. You're like, this is
Here
the
it
moment.
comes.
This
Here
is
it
the
comes.
moment. Yeah, like, come on, they didn't even get it. Like they're not feeling tingly on the inside.
Yeah.
It's so funny how the perceptions. It's also just very different from everybody that watches it.
Yeah,
and
that's true too. That's a whole other. That's true.
Yeah, that's one thing that I heard. I think it was Neil Strauss said it. And he's an amazing author, written tons and tons of books. But he'll say, if everybody keeps telling me that they hate one scene or one chapter, I'll think about removing it. But if it just takes one person to say, I love it, that was my favorite part of the entire book. And then he's like, all right, something's there. Like not if you don't need to win everybody over.
Cool. Yeah.
But obviously there's something there if it really strikes people. And sometimes I'm so surprised when people are like, oh, that's my favorite scene, or that's like that interview really captured me. I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't even think about that.
Completely. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So you put this film out there, and then
Yeah, well, after the end we released. I remember we actually sold. We signed our distribution deal for After the End, and it was the next day that I was getting coffee, not far from here actually, and was looked down at the New York Times and saw the cover image of the factory collapse at Ronald Plaza. And I remember, that's why I was saying earlier, I think the process that we went through with After the End kind of opened me up. Like I think I was noticing a lot, you know what I mean? Like I was just in that space of like still a little tender. And I looked down and read this article about how this clothing factory in Bangladesh had collapsed and taken the lives of, at that point, well over 1,000 people, mostly women, some children. And I read in that one article that at the time of the collapse, they were doing work for, major Western brands that I knew. And I also read that it was not the first, that there had been another factory collapse just before that, a fire just before that. Like it was just, I just remember thinking like, number one, how in the modern world are we doing business in this kind of way that's leading to this sort of reckless waste, loss, lessening of human life? And also, really, really, in that split second, thinking, how have I never stopped thinking about where my clothes come from? And it was a chilling thought, being someone who grew up in a kind of middle-class American family where when you got new clothes, you went to the store and you got them and you brought them home and you wore them, and growing up past that, you looked at the price or the style, and not a whole lot else, honestly, if I'm being honest, had ever come into my mind. And suddenly, it just takes one thing sometimes in your life to like one window gets opened and you look through it and you're like, oh my God, like there's a whole world through this one window, and I took the article back to my producer partner that day, and we started doing some research that week. And I remember reaching out to people in different parts of the world, some of the people who actually ended up in the film, authors, activists, journalists, and just saying like, help me understand this story. Like I'm like everyone sort of reeling from this one big incident, but like help me understand what's taking place. And by the end of that next week, I was convinced it was a film that I wanted to make, because it's sort of in one industry, which was the modern fashion industry, encapsulated so many of the things that I was really interested in, so many of the things that I was growing restless with and curious about. Suddenly, back to that comment of like the vehicle, it was like this one industry gives me a vehicle that I think we can use to look at all these other things.